I thought I'd surprise you with a nice dinner, I said. Something happened at work, but I figured we could talk about it after we eat. Her expression sharpened. No, talk now, she demanded. You've never done anything like this out of the blue. Something's wrong. I tried to keep things casual, mostly for Marisol's sake. Let's just talk later, all right? No, Eliza cut in, her voice cold. We talk now. So I took a breath and told her that my role had been terminated, that I'd received a decent severance package, that we had enough saved up to get by for a while, that I'd start applying right away, that we'd be okay. At least that's what I said out loud. Eliza's gaze moved from my face to the flowers in my hands, and she let out a dry laugh. What is this supposed to be? A pity bouquet from a laid-off amateur? The words hit hard. I looked over at Marisol, who stood frozen, her lips slightly parted, clearly stunned by the venom in her mother's voice. But Eliza wasn't finished. She took the bouquet from my hands, strode into the kitchen, and slammed it into the sink. Water splattered across the marble counters. My chest thudded with the dull roar of my heartbeat. See that, Marisol? She said, turning sharply toward our daughter. That's what failure looks like. Marisol's face crumpled with a mix of confusion and distress. I stood frozen, forcing a strained smile. I said nothing, not out of agreement, but because I didn't want to inflame the situation further, not with her watching. That night, after Marisol had gone to bed, Eliza unleashed a relentless storm of accusations. She railed about the mortgage, about her standing in the community, about the luxury vacation to Santorini she'd been organizing. She was mortified, she said. How would she explain this to her circle? Not once did she pause to ask how I was holding up. Eventually, I ended up on the living room couch, stunned by the ferocity of her words. I lay there staring at the ceiling, feeling something inside me begin to crack, not from the layoff, but from the growing realization of how many warning signs I had willfully ignored. She had always been obsessed with appearances, constantly seeking approval from people who didn't matter. Yet I had proposed to her. I had built a family with her. I had shaped my world around a woman who now treated me like a malfunctioning cash machine. The following morning, she left for her bar class without saying a word, as though I had vanished from her world entirely. That was when I decided to comb through our finances, and what I found left me numb. It turned out she'd opened a hidden credit line about half a year earlier. Over $16,000 in charges had accumulated. Luxury purchases, spa retreats, boutique wellness products. And then there was a $25,000 personal loan sitting on top of that. I had no clue what it was spent on. Designer clothes, aesthetic procedures, or maybe just padding her emergency fund. The sense of betrayal hit almost harder than the job loss. By the time she returned home that afternoon, loudly complaining on the phone to her friend Miranda about how my unemployment was ruining her image, something inside me had fundamentally shifted. We were no longer a team. We hadn't been for some time. I was clinging to the illusion of a marriage that had already expired. Still, I hadn't yet uncovered just how far her deception reached. 3 days after I was let go, I was still doing my best to be respectful. I told Eliza I'd applied to dozens of positions and that I was staying optimistic. She rolled her eyes like I'd just recited a bedtime story she'd heard too many times. That night, I found myself once again banished to the couch. Marisol had gone to bed, or so I believed. Close to midnight, I stirred to semi-consciousness when I picked up the sound of hushed voices. The hallway connected to the living room through a slim wooden door, and every so often, if someone spoke there, you could hear fragments drift through. It was Eliza whispering, presumably to Marisol, though at first the words didn't make sense. "Mom, when are we going to live with my real dad?" Marisol asked softly. I froze, every muscle in my body locked up. Real dad? "I don't want to stay here with this clown," she added, her voice low but firm. Clowns freak me out. I hate clowns. My mind whirled. My heart thundered in my chest. What on earth was Marisol talking about? Shh, Eliza said. Once the money stuff is sorted, we'll be out. Just a little longer. Then we can finally live with Marcus. Marcus, my former boss. The very man who had just fired me. That Marcus. I nearly sat up to confront her right then, but instinct stopped me. Instead, I stayed completely still, forcing my breath to remain even, my eyes shut, wrapped in the shadows of the living room. I opened my eyes on a Wednesday morning, expecting nothing more than the usual routine I'd followed for the last 8 years. The alarm shrieked at 5:45 a.m., that shrill, mechanical chirp cutting through the haze of sleep. As irritating as it was, I didn't reach to silence it with a snooze. I never did. Discipline was practically my creed. On the other side of the bed, my partner, Eliza, was still asleep, her auburn curls fanned across the pillow like a painting. She didn't move when I leaned over and gently kissed her temple. If she noticed, she gave no sign. I swung my legs off the mattress and made my way to the kitchen, a ritual as ingrained as breathing. The kitchen gleamed as usual thanks to Eliza's obsession with maintaining it in photo-ready perfection. Sometimes I wondered if her devotion to tidiness was less about comfort and more about presentation, something to parade before guests or social media followers. Still, I told myself it didn't bother me. Maybe that was a lie I'd just gotten used to. Once the coffee was brewed, I got in the car and drove to work, ready to take on another typical day as a mid-tier supervisor at a firm where I'd invested nearly a decade of hard work. If someone had asked me that morning whether I thought I'd be let go, I probably would have chuckled at the absurdity. My record was spotless. I hit every target. I stayed late. I came in on holidays. I volunteered for extra responsibilities without grumbling. That was my whole identity, the rock everyone could rely on. I had no clue that before lunch, my entire sense of security would be pulled out from under me. "Come on in," said Martin, waving me into his office from behind a massive glass-topped desk. He was my supervisor, a broad-shouldered man with a fondness for tailored suits and the kind of expression that made you feel like you were always 2 steps away from disappointing him. But until that morning, I hadn't seen him as a villain. "We're facing a wave of downsizing," he said, folding his hands as if in prayer. "It's not about you, really. You've been a valuable member of the team, but corporate has made the call to dissolve your role." I felt like the floor gave out beneath me. If my life were a structure, that moment was the first load-bearing wall collapsing. So much of who I was revolved around being the provider, the one who held everything together. And now, just like that, it was ripped away. "You'll receive a severance package covering the next 12 weeks, along with continued medical coverage for that time," Martin added. "I truly regret this." I couldn't tell if he actually meant it or if those words were just another part of the script handed down from higher-ups. My brain felt like it was wrapped in fog. I nodded, signed a few forms with a hand that barely felt like my own, and walked out. On the elevator ride to the underground parking lot, I stared at myself in the mirrored walls. Same outfit, crisp shirt, tailored slacks, polished leather shoes. But inside, I felt as though I'd been dropped into the middle of a story I didn't recognize, playing a role I never signed up for. I stayed in the car for 20 minutes, not crying, not raging, just mentally redrawing the blueprint of my life. That's when a strange stillness took hold of me. I made a quiet decision not to break the news to Eliza just yet. Instead, I'd soften the blow. Remind her that we were still in this together. I drove to Greenfield's Market and picked up everything I'd need to make her favorite risotto. On impulse, I also grabbed a high-end bottle of Merlot and spent far too much on a $70 bouquet filled with orchids and peonies. Not the smartest move, considering I was now jobless, but I needed to show her. I'm still me. I'm still here, taking care of us. Back at the house by mid-afternoon, I threw myself into cooking like it was some kind of mission. I made the stock from scratch, toasted the rice just right, and stirred slowly until it reached the perfect creamy texture. I tossed together a salad with a vinaigrette I'd whipped up from memory. I even dug out a pair of old candlesticks from the back of a drawer and placed them on the table to give the evening some charm. It all felt a little staged, but I told myself it was worth it. We'll get through this together. Eliza walked through the door at 5:30 p.m., our daughter, Marisol, trailing behind her. Marisol was 11, quiet but observant. She'd just come from her violin lesson. Normally, she'd give me a small smile and a wave. But this time she froze near the entrance, her eyes scanning the room, catching something in the air that even I hadn't noticed. "What's going on here?" Eliza asked, one eyebrow raised, her hand perched on her hip. She wore a tailored jacket, heels that clicked across the floor, and her nails were painted with an intricate metallic design. I suddenly became hyper-aware of the apron I was wearing, ridiculous over my button-down shirt. "Do you believe she's meeting Langford in person regularly?" Bryce asked, his notepad already in motion. "I'd bet my last dollar on it," I said. "Probably at his office or tucked-away hotels. They're arrogant enough to think no one's watching." Bryce nodded once. "I'll start with her daily routine. Yoga classes, spa stops, school pickups. If they're sloppy, I'll catch them fast." I handed him photos of Eliza, her car's license plate, and a calendar of her usual haunts. Everything I could think of. Bryce barely blinked. "I'll keep you updated," he said. "When I have something concrete, you'll know." It didn't take long. Less than a week later, I got a short text. "Target acquired. Check your email. She's with him now. Marriott lot. Not subtle. Sorry, man." My pulse pounded as I opened the email, and there it was. Proof. Bryce had taken crystal-clear shots through a long lens. Eliza was leaning into Marcus Langford's car, unmistakably caught in an intimate act that left no room for denial. Her expression couldn't be seen, but his smug face, smirking through the half-cracked window, was burned into my brain. I felt like the ground was tilting beneath me. A nauseating wave of disbelief surged through my chest, then curdled into pure fury. I couldn't unsee it, but I could weaponize it. I forwarded everything to Veronica with a short note. "We proceed. No mercy." Still, I didn't confront Eliza. Not yet. Outwardly, I played the part of the naive husband diligently searching for jobs, keeping the peace. But inside, I was building a case sharp enough to cut her carefully crafted life to shreds. Veronica had already confirmed that our state's statutes allowed for an alienation of affection lawsuit. Combined with paternity fraud, if Catalina turned out not to be mine, Langford was in for a nightmare that could derail his career and put him under public scrutiny he wasn't ready for. But none of it was as complicated or as painful as Catalina. She was still just a child. My daughter in every way that had ever mattered. Even after hearing her parrot Eliza's lies, I couldn't blame her. Kids echo what they're fed. They crave love and approval, and Eliza knew how to mold people, especially impressionable ones. Catalina deserved the truth, but she also deserved protection, and I'd give her both, even if it destroyed everything else. The day of the confrontation arrived like a storm front, quiet at first, but thick with pressure. I wore a charcoal suit, nothing flashy, but enough to look composed, controlled, dangerous. My 2 security hires, men who looked like they'd done tours in places maps don't even bother to name, met me outside the office complex just after noon. Declan's company, Langford Strategies, occupied the top 3 floors of a modern glass tower downtown. Polished chrome, valet out front, and the sort of sterile affluence that screams power to those who crave it. I didn't walk in through the front door looking to cause a scene. Not yet, but I had timed it perfectly. I'd confirmed with Carl that Isabella had arrived about 15 minutes earlier. They were likely holed up in his office, doing what they always did, scheming, smug, deluded. That made it the right moment. The receptionist's smile faltered as I stepped off the elevator with two men flanking me. She blinked at the sight. "Can I help you?" she asked, eyes flicking between us. "Yes," I said coolly. "Tell Marcus Langford that Michael Harrow is here to return what's his." Her eyes widened slightly. She reached for the phone, hesitated, then dialed. I could hear the quiet panic in her voice as she whispered to whoever picked up. Less than a minute later, two building security guards arrived, but they took one look at the two men I brought and decided to hang back. Declan didn't send for me. No surprise. So I walked right past the desk and down the hallway like I owned the building. When one of the guards finally called after me, one of my guys calmly stepped between us and said, "He has legal business. Unless you want your name on a civil suit too, I suggest you step aside." I liked that guy. Declan's corner office had frosted glass walls. As I neared it, I caught a flash of Eliza's wine-red blazer and Declan's smug posture behind his desk, exactly how Carl had described it in his reports. I didn't knock. I opened the door, stepped in, and dropped a thick envelope onto the polished wood between them. They froze. "What's this?" Declan asked, voice tight. Eliza turned pale, then flushed scarlet. "What are you doing here?" "Oh, just tying off a few loose ends," I said. "That's a lawsuit. Two, actually. One for alienation of affection, the other for paternity fraud." I looked straight at Declan. "Congratulations, you're a father, and you're about to be very, very broke." Declan stood abruptly. "You can't just—" The conversation only lasted a minute, but it felt like someone had taken a sledgehammer to the last support beam, holding up the wreckage of my life. Marisol, my daughter, or so I'd believed, was calling Marcus her real dad, and Eliza was whispering promises of a new life with him once their financial scheming was complete. My mouth went dry. My fingers trembled against the couch cushion, but I didn't move. I listened. The hallway fell quiet. I heard Eliza guide Marisol back to her bedroom, then her own footsteps fading toward the master suite. I lay there, rigid, hollow, nauseated. The betrayal was monumental. My wife had been sleeping with my boss. And worse, there was now a possibility that Marisol wasn't even biologically mine. There was no sleep that night, only racing thoughts and rewound memories. All the times Marcus had played the generous host, the harmless flatterer, the dinners he invited us to, how he'd gone out of his way to compliment Eliza, how I had introduced them, how he had hovered near her at every company party, lingered too long in conversation, laughed too hard at her jokes. I had assumed he was just naturally charismatic. But now, the puzzle pieces snapped into place. Eliza's growing contempt for me, her obsession with appearances, the shameless flirting between her and Marcus at the summer cookout, right under my nose. When the sky finally began to lighten, so did my resolve. I wasn't going to play the fool anymore. If they wanted to paint me as a clown, I'd show them how terrifying a clown's vengeance could be. I sat up slowly, pulled on yesterday's clothes in silence, and slipped out of the house before Eliza even stirred. As I walked to the car, I pulled up the contact information for a legal firm I'd used once for writing a will. "Hargrave and Lowell, how can I help you?" a receptionist answered. "I need an emergency consultation," I said. "Today. We can get you in at 9:30. "Perfect." The drive across the city felt almost dreamlike, as though I was watching myself from above, detached from the man behind the wheel. In the rearview mirror, I caught sight of someone I barely recognized, eyes sunken, jaw clenched tight with silent resolve. The attorney's office was in a quiet building in the historic district. Her name was Veronica Ellison, a sharp, formidable presence with a reputation for managing high-profile custody and divorce cases with surgical precision. I laid it all out for her, every bitter truth, being blindsided by termination, uncovering the affair, hearing my daughter refer to someone else as her real father. Veronica's brow lifted subtly when I dropped the name. "Marcus Langford?" she asked, pen tapping thoughtfully on her legal pad. The president of Halcyon Analytics? I nodded. Yes. I want to explore alienation of affection, paternity deception. Whatever recourse the law allows, I'm past caring about reputation. She gave a curt nod, flipping open a thick legal manual and marking several tabs. Alienation claims are viable in certain jurisdictions, she explained. But we'll need hard evidence, a verifiable relationship between your wife and Langford that clearly disrupted your marriage. As for paternity misrepresentation, that would require a discrete DNA test, and again, documentation, emails, messages, photos, anything that connects them beyond hearsay. I sat forward, my voice even. I'll get proof. I'll hire an investigator. I already heard her say she's just waiting to finalize the money before moving in with him. I want confirmation, on paper or on camera. Veronica looked me dead in the eye. Then don't waste time. The longer this drags, the more opportunity they'll have to prepare. Once we have what we need, we can file aggressively. But be advised, these cases can turn into legal trench warfare. They'll likely try to drain you with procedural attacks. I nodded, jaw tight. I'm ready for war. They've earned it. She slid a folder toward me, filled with paperwork and instructions. Steps for initiating divorce proceedings, protocol for covert paternity testing, and a referral to a seasoned private investigator known for discretion. After signing her retainer agreement and handing over a check, I stepped out into the crisp morning air. There was something twistedly satisfying in the weight of what I'd set in motion. If Eliza and Marcus believed they could dismantle my life without consequence, they were about to discover how wrong they were. I had been cast as the fool, but they'd underestimated how dangerous a man becomes when he's done playing nice. That same afternoon, I called the private investigator Veronica had recommended, a man named Bryce Hannigan. He was a former Marine in his late 40s with sharp eyes and a voice like crushed gravel. He listened to everything I had to say with a steady professionalism, never reacting, just taking it all in like a soldier assessing a mission. I raised a hand. I can. I have photographic evidence, a verified DNA test, a paternity complaint signed and notarized, and a team of lawyers who are more than happy to file public motions. By the end of the week, your board of directors will have full access to every salacious detail. I imagine shareholders might have thoughts about how you treat your employees and their families. Eliza finally found her voice. Michael, we can talk about this. No, Eliza, I said. You talked me out of everything for over a decade, but you lied me into hell. You don't get to talk me into peace. Declan looked like he wanted to say something, but couldn't find the words. He was already calculating damage control. It was written all over his face. I turned, looked back just once. You thought you were building a new life. Turns out you were just burning down mine. And now? You get to live in the ashes. I walked out before either of them could speak. In the elevator ride down, I finally exhaled. Not relief, not closure, but something cleaner than revenge. It was clarity. The curtain was down, the masks were off, and whatever came next, I would decide it. Her eyes flicked toward the hallway, calculating. She was trying to decide whether to stall, lie, or run interference. But she was too late. At exactly 4 p.m., the elevator behind us dinged open again, and out stepped Gerald. He was a brick wall of a man, dressed in business casual, but with fists clenched like sledgehammers. His eyes locked on Isabella first, then past her, through the glass wall of Declan's office, where our smug CEO sat behind his desk, half turned away from the door, speaking to someone on speakerphone. Is that him? Gerald growled, stepping beside me. Yes, I said evenly. That's the man. Gerald's eyes narrowed. And the video? Real. Dated. Time stamped. That hotel bar wasn't subtle. He let out a low, animalistic grunt and started down the hallway. Baxter moved just enough to block any building security who might try to intervene. Juan placed a manila envelope in Isabella's trembling hand. Divorce papers, paternity fraud suit, notice of litigation, he said, with no more emotion than if he were delivering pizza. Wait, James, please, she began, eyes wild now, panic rising. But I didn't answer. I was already following Gerald down the hall. Declan looked up just in time to see Gerald punch open the door with a heavy palm. The speakerphone cut off abruptly. Gerald crossed the room in 3 strides and slammed the manila envelope down on Declan's desk. You sorry son of a bitch, he spat. You think you can just crawl into everyone's wife and crawl back out clean? Declan stood, hands raised. Gerald, whatever you think. I don't think, I know, Gerald snapped. There's footage. You're done. I stepped inside then. Declan's face blanched. James, you too? Me especially, I said, tossing my own copy of the evidence across his desk. Your affair with Isabella, the child you pretended wasn't yours, the firing, the lies. I'm coming for everything. Declan's smug facade cracked. You can't. I already did. Lawsuits are filed, attorneys notified, and by Monday morning, your board of directors will have all this in their inboxes. With pictures. Behind me, Isabella was pleading with the receptionist to call security, but no one moved. No one wanted to be caught in this storm. I turned to Gerald, who stood pulsing with fury. You done? I asked him. For now, he said, but trust me, he'll see me again, in court. We left together, all 5 of us moving through that office like a funeral procession, with Declan's career and reputation in the casket. As the elevator descended, I felt no joy, no high, just clarity. Justice wasn't always clean, but sometimes it needed to be loud, and this was only the beginning. Declan straightened up, trying to reassert his usual alpha posture, but the presence of Gerald, towering and fuming, and my 2 guards flanking me shattered any illusion of control he thought he had. This is a private meeting, one of the board members said sharply, eyes darting between the furious faces now crowding the doorway. Not anymore, I said, stepping inside. I pulled out 2 thick envelopes and dropped them on the conference table with a satisfying slap. One was addressed to Declan Carter, the other to Isabella Reed Carter. I turned back to Isabella, who hovered just behind me, her expression frozen somewhere between rage and dread. Declan, I continued, my voice calm and cutting, you've been served. Alienation of affection, paternity fraud, and a personal lawsuit for intentional emotional distress. Enjoy the reading material. What the hell is this? He snapped, grabbing one envelope and ripping it open. Evidence, sworn affidavits, DNA results, financial records. Oh, and about Catalina? She's not mine. But you knew that, didn't you? I said. You've known all along. Declan's face turned ashen. Gerald stepped forward next, his own folder of photos and documentation in hand. And this is your side hobby, huh? Sleeping with my wife? You think you're untouchable because you wear a $1,000 watch and drive a Tesla? I didn't, Declan started, but Gerald slammed the folder down so hard that the entire table jolted. I've got photos, video, dates, Gerald growled. HR's going to see every single one of them, and so is your wife, if she even still exists. HR tried to interject, but the moment had gotten too big. Employees were now peering in through the glass walls. The building's illusion of order was unraveling by the second. Isabella looked like she wanted to melt into the floor. You're finished, Declan, I said, my voice quiet now. This company, this life you've built on deception and manipulation, I'm going to bury it with you still clutching the shovel. I turned on my heel, my guards stepping aside to let me pass. But just before I reached the door, I paused and glanced back. Oh, and Isabella? I said, eyes locking on her pale, shocked face. Catalina may not be mine by blood, but I'll still fight to be the father she deserves. Someone has to show her what integrity looks like. With that, I walked out, leaving behind silence, shattered reputations, and the first chapter of their downfall. A tense silence settled over the room, the kind that sucks the oxygen out of the air. Everyone was too stunned to speak, except for me. I had waited too long, swallowed too much pain, for this moment to pass quietly. Isabella stared at the divorce papers like they were radioactive. Her hand twitched, like she might finally snatch them up, deny everything, try to twist the narrative. But there was nothing left to twist. She was cornered, exposed in front of the very people she had likely hoped to impress or manipulate. Her lips trembled. "You blindsided me," she said hoarsely. "This is cruel." "Cruel?" I said, voice hard. "You lied to me for nearly a decade. You let me love a child while keeping her paternity a secret. You cheated, schemed, and smiled in my face while planning your exit behind my back. This isn't cruelty. This is consequence." Declan, still seated, had gone eerily quiet, his jaw tight. The color had drained from his face completely now, and a thin sheen of sweat glistened on his forehead. He looked up at the board members, grasping for some kind of lifeline. This is a personal matter. It has nothing to do with the company." "You're wrong," one board member finally spoke, a stern older woman in a navy pantsuit. "You're the face of the company, Declan. If what they're saying is true, if these lawsuits go public, this will reflect directly on our leadership. And if you've jeopardized the business through these personal entanglements, we have every reason to reconsider your position." Declan opened his mouth to object, but no words came out. Gerald took a step toward him, jabbing a thick finger in his direction. "I hope you're ready to lose everything, because if I have anything to say about it, this company's going to start bleeding from the inside out once the press gets hold of this." Declan looked at Isabella, betrayal etched into every line of his face. "You told me he didn't know. You told me Catalina was his." "I didn't know for sure," Isabella snapped, her composure finally cracking. "I thought it would be easier if he was the father. It was convenient. He was safe. You weren't. Safe." That word hit like a fist to the chest, so that was all I had ever been to her. Safe, steady, disposable. "Not anymore," I said quietly. "I'm done being your safety net." I turned to walk out, and Baxter and Juan flanked me without a word. Gerald stayed behind, still seething, probably not done tearing Declan apart. As I reached the elevator, I glanced back one last time. Isabella stood frozen, clutching the edge of the table like it was the only thing keeping her upright. Declan sat in stunned silence, the walls closing in, and the board members, now talking amongst themselves in low, urgent tones, had clearly begun the process of damage control. The elevator dinged. I stepped inside, and as the doors slid shut, I felt it. Not peace exactly, but power. The kind that comes from finally reclaiming your life. Now I had work to do. Russell and I had a company to build. And maybe, just maybe, I still had a daughter to protect. Not because I had to, but because I chose to. Declan lay crumpled on the floor, dazed and bleeding, his expensive suit wrinkled and stained. The illusion of power he'd wrapped himself in like armor was shredded now, shattered by Gerald's fists, the evidence I'd unleashed, and the cold, suffocating reality of public disgrace. Isabella, mascara streaking down her cheeks, dropped to her knees beside him like that might salvage what little dignity she had left. "Please," she begged, reaching for me with a trembling hand. I was confused. I didn't mean for any of this to happen. "You meant for all of it to happen," I said flatly. "You just didn't think you'd get caught. But now you are. By everyone." Building security finally arrived, ushered in by the frantic board member, but even they paused at the sight. Declan on the ground, bloodied and silent, Gerald fuming with barely restrained rage, Isabella crying next to a crumpled man who was supposed to be her future. I turned to the security officers calmly. "Everything here is legal. We've served court documents. This is civil, not criminal. You're free to verify it. Baxter handed over copies of the paperwork without flinching. Juan gave a short nod of confirmation. The officers looked at each other, then at the board members, who said nothing, too stunned or perhaps too quietly pleased to intervene. One of them, the older woman in the navy pantsuit, locked eyes with me. She gave the faintest of nods. Permission, maybe, or respect. I took one last look at Isabella. "Tell Catalina whatever you want," I said coldly. "But I'm not disappearing. I'll be around, more than you'll like, and the truth will catch up with you. It always does." As I turned and walked toward the elevator, Gerald followed silently. Baxter and Juan fell into step beside me. The ride down was quiet. At last, Gerald muttered, "Thanks for the heads up. I'll handle my end." "I know you will," I replied. "We're not victims anymore." The elevator doors opened to the lobby, where the receptionist and a few other employees stared, stunned. None of them said a word. They didn't have to. Outside, the rain had finally started to fall. It felt right, like a cleansing. I walked to my car, rain soaking into my coat, and for the first time in months, I didn't feel powerless. I felt free. The glass doors hissed closed behind me, muffling the chaos still unfolding inside. Each step down that hall felt like the weight of years falling off my shoulders. Every insult, every sleepless night, every moment I questioned my own worth, crushed under the boots of forward motion. Outside, the rain had become steady, soaking the city in a gray hush. I didn't run. I didn't flinch. I welcomed the water like absolution. Gerald caught up to me on the sidewalk, soaked and still trembling with residual rage. "You were right," he said through clenched teeth. "I needed that." "You needed the truth," I said. "Now you've got it." We didn't shake hands or offer words of solidarity. We didn't have to. We were two men who'd been lied to, humiliated and tossed aside, but not broken, not anymore. I slipped into my car, Baxter and Juan giving a subtle nod before heading to their own vehicle, professionals to the end. As I drove away, the tower behind me shrinking in the rear view, I didn't feel triumph. This wasn't victory, not yet. It was reclamation of my name, my sanity, my life. But the road ahead was still long. Custody decisions, financial battles, public fallout, Catalina. My fingers tightened around the steering wheel at her name. She was innocent. She was caught in the middle of lies she didn't ask for. I didn't know what role I would play in her future, but I knew one thing with absolute certainty. No matter what the DNA said, she was still my little girl in the only way that mattered. And I wasn't walking away from her. The storm had passed, but it left behind scorched earth. And from that, I built something new. The business I launched with Russell, and now Gerald, thrived. Clients appreciated our transparency, our no-nonsense approach. I never advertised what I'd been through, but the edge in my voice and the fire behind my eyes told them I was someone who didn't flinch in the face of betrayal or bullshit. As for Catalina, our time together was quieter now, more cautious. I never told her everything, just enough for her to understand that adults can hurt each other in ways children shouldn't have to carry. We built new rituals, weekend pancakes, rainy day movies. I let her ask questions when she was ready. And I promised I'd never lie to her, even when the truth hurt. Isabella faded into the background. She fought me less and less as her legal options dried up, and her social circle shrank. Declan tried to relocate and rebrand, but word follows faster than any plane ticket. Last I heard, he was consulting for some small firm that didn't care about reputations as long as the money kept flowing, but he'd never reclaim what he'd lost. I didn't celebrate. There were no victory cigars, no champagne flutes raised, just peace, earned peace. And the knowledge that no matter how thoroughly someone tries to unravel your life, you can always choose to sew it back together with stronger thread.